So today I want to tell you a story. It's a story about a murder. The murder of Terry Lee Kiefer, who was murdered in 1995. So it's an old murder, but it deserves more attention than it got. This murder uh, isn't reported on a whole lot, but it deserves to be talked about, the evidence presented, and people to listen and to understand because there's some lies being told about this person and who really murdered her. And it's not right. And so I'm making this video to set the record straight. Terry Lee Kiefer was murdered by her husband, David Allen Dicus. To be clear, he was convicted and found guilty of first-degree murder. However, like I said, there are a lot of lies circulating around this story by a certain someone, and I'm tired of the lies. The lies are trying to paint David Dicus as innocent when he's not. He's guilty. And we're going to go through the whole thing. All right, so I have some notes here. So here's some of the facts. Here are the key people. The murderer is David Allen Dicus. His accomplice is his lover, the woman he was having an affair with, Catherine S. McNicholas. And David Dicus's son is Lucas Dicus. He's going to be important later. The victim is David's wife, Terry L. Kiefer, and she was 37 years old when she died. So this is a very old website. It was like a memorial to her. Doesn't get a lot of views anymore. As you can see that this is ridiculously old. This is mid to late 90s old. But I'll post links to all of the evidence, all the citations in the description so you can check it out yourself. But two things that are really interesting here, which I'm going to go into and I'm going to play later on this video, are the verdict. It's the verdict by the judge in this trial, Judge Silkworth. And there's two audio files here, and this is an old Real Media, so I had to download these things. But yeah, we'll get to that later. Okay, so here's some of the facts. So Terry L. Kiefer was murdered on July 29th, 1995. Her body was found months later on September 7th, 1995, near a town called Skaggsville. So all of this takes place in Maryland. So let's take a look at some of the articles that are talking about this story. And in fact, there's this one kind of a compilation of all major articles that have been compiled. Some of these are actually newspapers. I'm not going to read every single little thing, but I'll read a little bit so you get an idea of kind of what's going on here. So this is published November 20th, 1999. November 20th, 1999. Okay, so it's in reverse order. So let's start at the bottom here, I guess. Divided by courtroom aisle, family endures murder trial. Dicus accused in death of wife. Son-in-law's watch. A few candles were to top a cake last night at the home of Muriel and Donald Kiefer. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that name. to mark a birthday that is not taking place. Their daughter, Terry Kiefer, would have been 42. They spent the day as they have spent most weekdays this month, in the Anne Arundel County Circuit Courtroom of Judge Ronald A. Silkworth, at the trial of the man charged with first-degree murder in the death of their daughter in July 1995. The accused is their son-in-law, David A. Dicus, 41. And unfortunately, I don't have any photos of this murderer. I don't have any mugshots or anything like that. It might be possible to FOIA them, but there's nothing available online, not that I could find. On the other side of the courtroom sits their grandson, Lucas Dicus, a 15-year-old whose future hangs on the outcome of his father's murder trial. On nearby benches are friends, his paternal grandfather, an occasional Dicus relative. Several members of his father's family have been subpoenaed as witnesses and have not been allowed to attend the hearing. I've lost Terry, I've lost David, and I've lost our grandson, said Muriel Kiefer. Okay, so you get an idea of what's going on. So it's talking about let's look here. Lucas, who remains close to his father, disputes the prosecution's case. Assistant State's Attorney Frank Ragoin said Dicus strangled his wife in the bedroom of their Glen Burnie home and had his girlfriend, that would be the woman he was having an affair with, help dump the body near Skaggsville and abandon Kiefer's car on Interstate 97, staging a flat tire, and later thoroughly cleaning the car. This is going to become important later because actually a neighbor saw both Dicus and Catherine cleaning the inside of that car. You're going to hear that in the audio. Kiefer's body was found 41 days after she disappeared. This is Lucas talking here. Every way they look at it, they see it the same way. Every way I've looked at it, I've seen it the same way, and it's a different way. I don't see how my dad could have done that, Lucas said. Okay, let's skip ahead. Here's the next article. Closing arguments. Dicus showed little emotion during the 3.5 hours of closing arguments yesterday. With his long hair cut for the trial, Dicus briefly smiled at his 15-year-old son. Dicus, 41, is charged with first-degree murder in July 1995 death of his wife, Terry Lynn Kiefer. The couple met at Northeast High School in Pasadena. They began dating after graduation and had been married for 13 years at the time of her death. He watched her life drain through his fingers, said Assistant State's Attorney Frank Ragoin. He ended his closing statement with an African proverb: human blood is very heavy, and the man who sheds it cannot run away from it. Do not let David Dicus get away with it. Here's something really important. McNicholas said Dicus planned to make it appear that his wife's car was disabled with a flat tire and that she had been the victim of an unknown attacker. So, let's talk about what happened. So I'm going to show you this map here. Glen Burnie. That's where this family's from. Skaggsville. It's kind of hard to see it here. Skaggsville. That's where the body was found. The distance between the home and where the body was found, approximately, is 15 miles. And I put into Google Maps the route it would take if you were to go from Glen Burnie to Skaggsville, and it's taking this kind of northern route. But this is not the route that Dicus took. Now, I'm going to tell you what David Dicus alleged happened, how his wife supposedly was murdered. David Dicus alleges that his wife and him got into an argument in the middle of the night. Then she decided to leave the house in the middle of the night, like around 12 a.m. or so, maybe 1 a.m., somewhere around there, really, really late at night, to go to work because she was so mad. Now, of course, this makes absolutely no sense. Absolutely no sense. So he said that he just let her leave the house in the middle of the night to go to work, supposedly, which makes no sense, or like around 12 a.m. or 2 a.m. And then somehow she got a flat tire on Route 97. So I want to show you this map. Zoom out a little bit. So this is where they lived. This is where the Dickuses lived. Glen Burnie. This is Route 97. Now, this over here, this destination, is where she worked. This is where Terry Kiefer worked. Okay? She worked at this place, Crofton Convalescent Crofton Convalescent Center. And this is the address. Okay? So, how do I know this? From this. So, this is from one of those articles. And as you can see, it says at the top, Kiefer, an administrative secretary at Crofton Convalescent Center. And it also says that her car, a Toyota station wagon, was found abandoned northbound on Interstate 97. So this comes from this citation, the Washington Post. It's behind a paywall, but you can see the full story on that other website. I'll post all of it in the description. So let's go back. So Google Maps, now remember this took place in 95. So obviously they didn't have Google Maps back then, but Google Maps is taking a different route. But as you can see, Route 97 is more or less parallel to this other route that Google Maps wants to take. If you were to go from Glen Burnie to where the victim worked, right? So if you were to take Route 97, you would have been going southbound on Route 97 to where she works, the convalescent center or whatever. Just like that. Notice anything suspicious already? There's a contradiction. The car was found abandoned northbound on Route 97. But wait a minute. If she were to be going to work, she would have had to have been going southbound. But yet the car was found on the northbound direction, not the southbound direction. And it was found 2 miles away. So 2 miles away, Let me see if I can do this thing, measure distance. Distance to here. So the car was found on Route 97 about 2 miles away. You see this? There we go. You see that? 2 miles. So it's found probably somewhere around here. But it was found in the wrong direction, going north, heading back home, instead of going south, heading towards work. And what is Route 97? It's a busy fucking highway. This is what Route 97 looks like. This is a photo of the street level. It's a busy fucking highway. Now, what David Dicus is trying to have people believe is that she got a flat tire on this road, this highway, and then she got out and then started wandering around and then got picked up by a psychopath killer, a serial killer, who then drove her around and then at some point murdered her later on. Now, as you can see, this makes no damn sense. No one would get out on a busy fucking highway that leads into Baltimore, by the way, in the middle of the night if they got a flat tire that was 2 miles away from home. If she got a flat tire that happened 2 miles away from home, she would have driven back home on the flat. You can drive on the flat. This is the middle of the night. Why on earth? You're not even that far away from home. But that's the other suspicious thing. Why was it so close to home? We're going to get to that in a minute. But I also want to point out that the tire was intact. There was a puncture in it, but the tire was intact. We'll get to that later as well. Let's look at the notes again. So here are the key facts. The body was found September 7, 1995 near Skaggsville. So we already have an idea of where Skaggsville is, right? So let's go back to the other map. So this is Skaggsville. This is Glen Burnie. Now this Google Maps is taking a northern route in order to get to Skaggsville. That is not the route that David Dicus took. He took a southbound route. This way, likely. Something similar. Going south more to Skaggsville. And then this is where David Dicus dumped the body, in Skaggsville. And as you can see, Skaggsville is 15 miles away. You see that? About 15 miles. Why was it so close? Now, David Dicus would have us believe that a random psycho killer who kidnapped Terry Kiefer somewhere on Route 97 when she got a flat tire, even though the tire was intact, except for one puncture hole. We'll get to that later. And then she was kidnapped by some psycho killer, and then he decided to dump her really, really close to where he picked her up on Route 97 and really close to where she lived. Regardless of whether or not he knew exactly where she lived, it doesn't matter. Why was it so close? The reason why the body was dumped so close is because the killer was on a timeline. Okay, the killer was on a timeline. The killer had to dispose of the body before sunrise because that is when his son Lucas Dicus wakes up. And remember, you got to do a round trip, right? So it takes time to get there, and it takes time to get back. So according to Google Maps, it seems like it would take like over 40, over 45 minutes or so to drive from Glen Burnie to Skaggsville. But remember, he needs to dispose of the body before sunrise because that's when his son wakes up. He has to do all of this, and that puts a limit on how far away he can dispose of the body. So that's the reason why it was so close. Now, if this were a random psycho killer, the psycho killer is not on a timeline. The psycho killer has all the time in the world to dispose of a body. He could drive hundreds of miles away and bury the body. And that's the other thing. The body was haphazardly disposed of. So again, a lot of this information comes from all these articles, these various articles. Basically what happened was the body was found a few months later. Let's look at the notes again. So it was found September 7th, 1995, near Skaggsville. And it was in a wooded area. And that was probably the closest place he could dispose of the body. And it was the body was not buried. It wasn't destroyed. It was decomposing because it was a few months after the fact. But it was not buried. Why wasn't it buried? Because the murderer was on a time limit. He had to dispose of the body before sunrise. And he didn't have time to dig a hole and bury it. And that's the reason. But if it were a random psycho killer, then the psycho killer has all the time in the world to dispose of the body and can drive hundreds of miles away and bury it. I think that would be the most logical thing for a person to do. So here are the key facts. Car was found abandoned. Interstate 97 north. It was the wrong direction. 2 miles away from their home. Why was it so close? It was so close because that's where, because David Dicus was on a timeline. Blah, blah, blah. So Catherine moved in with David Dicus just 1 month after his wife went missing. Now, whenever you have a woman moving in with a man just 1 month after his wife goes missing, you know for a fact that they were having an affair. So this proves that they were having an affair. But it also demonstrates something else, that this guy didn't give a fuck that his wife went missing. Okay, who does this? Who does this? His wife goes missing, and then 1 month after the fact, this woman moves in with him. You know, as if he just doesn't give a fuck. Catherine testified that Dicus called her on July 29th, 1995, and told her that him and his wife had argued, and he needed to see her immediately. If this happened, there would be a phone record. If David Dicus murdered his wife, this phone record should exist somewhere, and this would prove this event, right? It would demonstrate that David Dicus had murdered his wife and then called Catherine because he needed her help to dispose of the body. This phone record should exist somewhere. Unfortunately, I don't have it. So remember, this is 1995. This was before the age of cell phones. So it's a landline. But there should be a phone record of this phone call somewhere. I don't believe this was brought up in trial. I wish it was. Now, Catherine knew the color of the blanket. Again, this is all contained in these articles. She knew the color of the blanket that the body was wrapped in, even though that there was no blanket found at the site where the body was dumped. So how did the police know she was telling the truth? Now, the color of the blanket was green, but there was no blanket found at the scene of the crime. Well, I shouldn't say the scene of the crime, the scene of where the body was dumped. So how did the police know she was telling the truth? Because they found green fibers on her body, but there was no blanket. So that's how you know that she wasn't lying, nor were the police feeding her information, which is what Lucas Dicus has been trying to allege and gaslight people into believing. No, that's not true. The police did not actually know that she was wrapped in a blanket or anything. What they knew was that there were green fibers on her body, but there was no blanket. So they didn't know necessarily that she was wrapped up in a green blanket. Catherine knew that. And what she said simply corroborated with the evidence that the police and investigators knew about. It was consistent. There were green fibers on her body. So the fact that Catherine said that she was wrapped in a green blanket corroborates that. So, how did all of this even come about? Well, in the audio that we're going to listen to in just a minute, um, basically, Catherine, they're going to try to paint Catherine as like an innocent victim, a domestic abuse victim. And no, no, she's not. Um, she was very likely the mastermind of this whole thing. So what really happened was Catherine and David Dickus were having an affair, and Catherine was encouraging David Dickus to murder his wife. Now Catherine is on plenty of medications at the time. She is not a good person for a variety of reasons. However, so the 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 court was trying to, or rather, the prosecution was trying to paint Catherine as like an innocent domestic violence victim. The truth is that she struck a plea bargain to get immunity from prosecution as an accomplice as long as she testified against David Dickus. But as far as I'm concerned, Catherine is just as guilty. David Dickus was the one who committed the murder itself, but Catherine was the mastermind of this murder. She was the one who put him up to it, and she encouraged him to do it. And then he finally went through with it. Now, in the articles, in these various articles, it's going to talk about the various motives. Why did David Dickus do this? And it's going to say that because he was probably going to lose custody of his son, Lucas Dickus, which there is truth to. There's truth to that. He probably was concerned about that. But it is also very likely the case that Catherine put him up to it. She just finally convinced him to do it. These kind of delusions of having a family together and all this nonsense, and had to get the wife out of the way. I think that's what really happened. So let's go to the timeline. David Dickus has sex with his wife, and as far as I'm concerned, if you murder your wife during sex, it's rape. Okay, that is not consensual. Strangles her during this rape. David Dickus wraps her body up in a green blanket tied with pantyhose. David calls Catherine, the woman he was having an affair with. She arrives at his home shortly afterward. They both drive to Skaggsville. David Dickus dumps the body. They drive back home. And this one I'm not too sure. I don't really know exactly where Catherine lives. She may live within walking distance. I don't know. So maybe he dropped her off on the way back. Not really sure. David abandons the station wagon on Route 97 North because that's the direction he was heading in order to get back home. And he rode a bike that was in the back of the station wagon the rest of the way, which was 2 miles. So let's look at that map again. So this one. So remember, Skaggsville. Where's Skaggsville? Let's see if we can cross-reference it. It's kind of hard to see when you zoom everything out. Let me see. Guilford. North Laurel. There's Skaggsville. Okay, so that's Skaggsville. Zoom in a little bit. This is where they lived. That's Skaggsville. So David Dicus likely took 97, maybe took a different route over here, maybe crossed over here, went this way, eventually to Skaggsville here, right? So he would have gone through 97, probably not taking this route because the car was abandoned on 97. Took 97 probably to here, then south here, all the way to Skaggsville. And then the body was dumped, and then they head back together. At some point, he's going to have to drop her off somewhere. Maybe. I don't really know. We'll just put that aside for now. So they're coming back the same route, and then they take 97 north until they get here, which is about 2 miles away. And then David Dicus abandons the car on the side of the road, and he punctures the tire on the side wall of the tire, not on the surface that makes contact with the road. Now, that's the most important thing. Let's look at this. McNicholas and Dickus planned to make it appear that his wife's car was disabled with a flat tire and that she had been the victim of an unknown attacker. His girlfriend helped dump the body near Skaggsville and abandoned Kiefer's car on Interstate 97, staging a flat tire, and later thoroughly cleaning the car. Now, if you ever had a blowout on a major highway, or not even a major highway, if you ever had a blowout, you get a puncture on your tire while the car is in motion, the tire does not simply deflate without any other injury to the tire. Okay, basically the tire disintegrates, especially if you're moving at a high velocity, which you would have been if you were driving on a major highway going into Baltimore. So at least 50, 55 miles per hour, but likely more than that. If you get a blowout, if the tire hits something and there's a puncture in it, the tire begins to disintegrate. Okay, this is provable. This is just the laws of physics. If you're driving and there's a puncture, the tire will be ruined by the time you come to rest. And if you don't believe me, you can test it. I don't recommend ruining your own tire in order to test it, but I think you can use your imagination and figure it out. Yeah, the tire disintegrates, and I know this happens because I've had a blowout on a highway before. The tire disintegrates, but that is not what happened to this tire. This tire, other than a puncture on the side wall, it was intact, which implies that the tire and the car were at rest when the tire was punctured, again on the side wall, not on the surface of the tire that made contact with the road. So that's how you know that everything David Dickus said is bullshit, because the tire proves everything. So what Lucas Dickus, the son, let's go back to the notes. So the son is a vociferous supporter of his father. So Lucas Dickus, let's see. This is Lucas Dickus. So he insists that his father is innocent. However, if the tire was punctured when the car was at rest, then that proves one very important thing, that Terry Kiefer never left the house alive that night. That's what it proves. Terry Kiefer never left the house that night. Okay, because that entire scene with the tire being deflated, being punctured, it was totally staged. And the only person who would stage something like that is David Dicus. No one else would do that. No one else. And there's no psychopath serial killer would stage a flat tire. Only David Dicus would. And he was the only one with a motive, and he had no alibi. Okay, the fact of the matter is that stranger danger is total bullshit. If you're going to get murdered, you're going to get murdered overwhelmingly by someone you know, not by a stranger. So David Dickus abandons the station wagon on Route 97 North because that's the direction he was heading in order to get back home. And that's the reason why the car, the station wagon, wasn't found on Route 97 South, because that's just not the direction that he was going in. He was going back home. That's why it was on North. So the conclusions, I just discussed those things. All right. Let us listen now to the verdict being read by the judge. So the audio is going to be kind of crappy, but bear with me. I might pause it from time to time, but for the most part, I'm just going to let it play. It's going to be about like 50 minutes, maybe. So, bear with me. I might pause it from time to time and make some remarks. Let's listen to it together.
Maryland University, David Allen Dicus, Frank Wayne, Assistant State Attorney.
Gil Cocker for the defense. All right, first let me take this opportunity to express to counsel, Mr. Ragione and Mr. Cochran and his staff, my appreciation, sincere appreciation for the level of professionalism that both sides showed in the presentation of this case. Regardless of the outcome of this case, I think it's fair to say that both the state and the defendant have been well represented. Secondly, let me caution all of those who are in attendance. I recognize that this is a highly emotional case. It has both sides. I recognize that. I will render my decision and provide, hopefully, a brief explanation. I would caution, I expect no outbursts from any portion of the courtroom or from anyone, or interruption from any source. Now, having said that, this case is one that I'm sure has engendered much emotion or sympathy from many sides, from both families. My decision is not one that can be based upon sympathy for either of the parties, the families of the victim or the family of the defendant, or the defendant, for that matter. My decision has to be based upon the facts as I find them in this courtroom and upon the law as I apply them to this case. Now, this trial started on November the 2nd and continued for a number of days until the closing arguments I heard on November the 16th. I've heard from numerous witnesses, all of whom were sworn to tell the truth, who were examined, cross-examined, re-examined at length. I've considered the stipulations. I've considered that testimony. I have reviewed the numerous exhibits, and I've had the opportunity to review each and every one. I've had the opportunity to consider the arguments of counsel. I've had the opportunity, I've weighed and considered that all the evidence and the totality of the evidence. I have attempted to, in fact, judge the credibility of those witnesses as it is my function to do as a trier of fact. Attempting to weigh the evidence, recognizing that it's not a question of numbers of witnesses or numbers of exhibits, but it's a matter of attempting to weigh the testimony. I have considered all of that. I am mindful, the court is mindful, that the defendant in this case, as every defendant, is cloaked with a presumption of innocence, a presumption that protects him throughout this case. and is only overcome by evidence that is sufficient to convince the court of his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt and to moral certainty. Mr. Dicus is charged with the crime of first-degree murder, an indictment that also includes first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and manslaughter. First-degree murder is the intentional killing of another person with willfulness, deliberation, and premeditation. In order to convict Mr. Dicus of first-degree murder, the state is required to prove that the conduct of the defendant caused the death of Terry Lynn Kiefer, that this killing was willful, deliberate, and premeditated. Willful means that the defendant actually intended to kill the victim. Deliberate means that the defendant was conscious of an intent to kill the victim. Premeditated means that the defendant thought about the killing. That there was enough time before the killing, though it may only have been brief, for the defendant to consider the decision whether or not to kill, and enough time to weigh the reasons for and against that choice. Premeditated intent to kill must be formed before the killing. In this case, the state's case rests in large part on the testimony of Kathy McNicholas. She described in detail how she was called in the early morning hours of July the 28th, 1995, to help Mr. Dicus, as in, I believe, her words, or perhaps she contends Mr. Dicus's words, dispose of the trash, which Miss McNicholas quickly learned meant to dispose of the body of Terry Lynn Kiefer.
All right, so that's kind of interesting. The judge is kind of letting on a little bit more than he realized. So how did Catherine know that taking out the trash meant disposing of the body of Terry Kiefer? Because she had prior knowledge of all of this. She knew that all of this was going to go down. They had conspired together to do this, and she was gleefully supportive of it. What a cunt. What a fucking cunt. So I have no pity at all for this Catherine bitch. she deserves to be in prison. And just to let everyone know, that justice was not served. She escaped prison even though she conspired to murder someone.
She testified in detail to these events, recounting, as Mr. Ragione believes, facts that only one who was present at the time of the disposal of the body would know. Now, the defense has a number of things, has had and maintained a number of themes in this case. The defendant, one theme being the defendant is an innocent man, the victim of a rush to judgment by the police department. As Mr. Cochran called DDI, David a conclusion that he believes was reached without the proper investigation, without following proper police procedure, and certainly without being thorough, following appropriate leads. Defense also contends that as a result of that, the real killer or killers escaped prosecution due to the failure of the police to do a competent and thorough investigation and follow-up. The defense also contends that the defendant is wrongly accused by an immunized witness, something that which the defense is not permitted to do, whose credibility has been attacked time and time again for many reasons. Also contending, the defense contends that the immunized witness's version of the facts is disproved by numerous alleged sightings of Ms. Kiefer after the time she was reported to be missing. The state says there's a mountain of evidence. The defendant contends that the facts can be compared to a puzzle. Puzzle of pieces being a puzzle of which the defense contends where there are too many pieces missing, or pieces that exist that simply don't fit. Or if they do fit, when they're put together, they don't show the image that's required. Indeed, the state has, in the absence of conclusive forensic evidence, attempted to put all the pieces of the puzzle together to show what really happened to Ms. Kiefer. The defense position is, of course, that the pieces of the puzzle, once put together, simply would not permit the court to find beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is responsible for this crime. Well, we do not have, unfortunately, an eyewitness to the killing. We do not have definitive forensic evidence that ties this defendant to the crime scene.
Okay, so before he mentioned, like, there were some sightings of Kiefer, I don't know. He kind of glossed over that, and I didn't think that was right. So he said there were like multiple witnesses who claimed to have seen Kiefer, I don't know, walking around and doing things even after after she disappeared. Um, the thing is, though, is that none of those witnesses came forward and testified in court. Um, Nor does it make any sense. It seems like it was probably just mistaken identity, or maybe they just made it up. Maybe they wanted to be involved in this kind of thing. In any case, none of these witnesses um, are credible because they're just none of them came forward. If there was a credible witness to seeing her after the fact, uh, they would have came forward and testified, and they didn't. None of them did, because they didn't see her. Like none of this bullshit makes any sense. That she was seen after the fact that she disappeared. Of course she wasn't seen after that because she never left the house. She would not have got not if she got a flat tire on a friggin' major highway. She would not have gotten out of the car. But anyway, I already talked about that. Let's listen on.
We do have a medical examiner's opinion about the cause of death. The defense contends that even that is not sufficient because it is nothing more than conjecture or speculation, because it is not based upon scientific a scientific analysis, but it's simply based upon ruling out other causes. We have the testimony of an immunized witness who suffers from.
Okay, so I just need a remark about the cause of death thing. If the cause of death were like something like blunt force trauma, it would have been obvious, like that there would have been damage to the skull or whatnot. Like there would be clear damage even after the body had decomposed. You got to remember, like a couple of months had passed until they found the body, and really the only if someone strangled someone to death, the damage to the neck would not be visible on decomposition. So that's what he's talking about. That like they are basically ruling out, other possibilities like stabbing to death, blunt force trauma, because there would have been evidence of this even on a decomposed body. But there's only so much that a decomposed body can demonstrate if someone was strangled to death, right? So if someone was strangled to death, that damage to the neck would not be visible because it would be very minor compared to the damage caused by decomposition. So that's what he's talking about there.
A major bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 disorder.
Let's rewind a little bit.
We have the testimony of an immunized witness who suffers from a major bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 disorder.
Okay, so he's talking about Catherine, right? So he's talking about how she's bipolar and has mental problems, which is true. But you got to remember that just because someone is mental and bipolar and a piece of shit doesn't mean that they are unreliable witness necessarily, because they were there, right? Like a reliable witness does not mean that the person is reliable. It means that they were there and they saw what they saw, and that what they're saying meets the facts of the situation. That's all it means. It doesn't mean that Catherine is a good person, because she's not. She's a cunt.
With a history of deception, lies, manipulation. Miss McNicholas, who had at least 9 or 10 different chances over a 3-year period to tell the truth about her involvement in the murder, if her version was true. We have the failure of the police department to turn over investigative leads.
Okay, so he's talking about how Catherine, over a 3-year period, so she died in 95, and they're only bringing this up 3 years later, apparently. So the reason why this even got brought to trial and why David Dicus was finally arrested was because apparently Catherine was joking about it. It's not fucking funny, but she was joking about it with some date that she met, I guess at a bar or something. And the guy, like, actually was normal and was horrified at what he was hearing because she was joking about helping David Dicus murder someone. I would love to hear from this guy to hear everything he had to say about what she said. And I'm sure she did testify at the trial, but unfortunately I don't have a full audio of everything that happened at the trial. I only have the verdict being read by the judge. So, but anyway, let's listen on. But yeah, just to close that up, yeah, she was joking about it with this guy, and then the guy reported her, and then that's what got everything started. And she struck a plea deal with the prosecution to gain immunity. And now the prosecution's trying to paint her as an innocent victim, domestic violence survivor, or whatever, which is total bullshit.
Which came early on in 1995. Not to mention the failure to follow up those leads because they either conflicted with statements given by Mr. Dicus or because they didn't fit within the theory of DDI. Now, these are the two versions that we have. The mountain of evidence versus the incomplete puzzle. I had examined the evidence. In doing so, I had attempted to do that which one or both counsel asked me to do, and that is to apply my own common sense and experience to the facts as I find them to be, drawing reasonable inferences from those conclusions. Now, what do we know? I know, for one thing, that from the testimony that Terry Lynn Kiefer was a fine person. She was a good mother, daughter, friend, neighbor, and she certainly was not one who deserved to die. She was troubled, as we know from the testimony of her friend at work, Ms. Smith, I believe, who testified that she had told her that she suspected that the defendant was having an affair with a woman that they both knew. It is clear to me in the testimony, and I don't think it's in dispute at all, that was the case. In fact, that woman was Kathy McNicholas. We know that the defendant and his wife and son Luke.
So what is he saying there? He's saying that the victim knew that her husband was having an affair with Kathy.
Were home on the evening of July the 28th after going to dinner at the diner. That appears to be clear. We know that Mrs. Kiefer, the mother, spoke to her daughter at approximately 9:30 p.m. on July the 28th. They did discuss whether or not Miss Kiefer would come over to her parents for a cookout. Mrs. Kiefer, the victim, wasn't sure. She said she might have to work on Saturday. According to Luke, they watched television. He went to bed. His parents were awake, and he says having a drink, also watching TV. After that point in time, Luke Dicus never saw his mother again. It's from that point in time that we have the two versions, or perhaps more than two versions, but for the sake of this discussion, I'll say two versions. One is the defendant's version, or versions, provided in the course of his reporting his wife. And he did report his wife as a missing person, not immediately, but on Sunday, the 30th. And then we have what Mr. Cochran referred to as Story B. Story B being the story that essentially Ms. McNicholas has testified to in this courtroom concerning the call she received in the early morning hours of July the 29th. Now, I'm not going to review in detail all of the testimony in this case. But what I've had to do is to determine which of the versions are credible, which of the versions are believable, to determine whether or not I can even reach the conclusion as to which of these versions can be believed beyond a reasonable doubt. In doing that, what I've attempted to do is, of course, apply common sense, but to look for other evidence. I would certainly like to have seen evidence in the form of definitive forensic evidence, but as I've already said, that unfortunately was not there. And perhaps Mr. Raggioni may be correct, that one would not expect that to exist once the body in this case was found more than 3 years. The body was found in this case several months, sometime in early September. So perhaps one would not expect that to exist. First thing Mr. Red points out is that Ms. McNicholas testified to things that only one who was a participant in the disposal of the body, or perhaps the murder, would know. The defense, in response to Ms. McNicholas' story, contends that much of what she testified to is information that was readily available to anyone, not to mention Ms. McNicholas, to have read, seen, including details of the location of the body, pictures in the Sun paper that show a map directing her to.
Okay, so what he's saying here is that, like, oh no, all the shit that Catherine said, Kathy, uh, she's just saying shit that, is publicly available. You can read in newspapers. Oh, and everyone knows that the body was found in Skaggsville, because it was reported in the newspapers and shit like that. And the judge is saying, yeah, some of this was, but then there's stuff that only an accomplice who was there would be privy to know, and we'll hear that in a second.
That would direct her to the location of the body. Much of that is true. However, if I accept that, I would have to accept a couple of things. First of all, there is an implication that either Ms. McNicholas read all of this information and was able to put all of this information together, therefore concoct this false story so that she could support her immunized version of the testimony of what she's presented in this case. But that seems to me would also require that Ms. McNicholas have been provided information by the police officers, because there is some information that was never reported, some information that would never have been known except to one who was there, or one who had been either given that information from someone who was there or someone who actually saw this. I've reviewed all of the exhibits, all of the letters. I've reviewed all of the newspaper accounts, and I find nowhere in the newspaper account or newspaper accounts any reference to the position of the body. And that is the fact that the body of Miss Keefer's left arm was pointed one direction, her right arm another. It's evident from Exhibit 22.
Okay, so here he's saying that Catherine, knew kind of the position of the body because she was there. And this was not something that could have been reported on in the newspapers. So apparently, like, the two arms were pointing in different directions. And only someone who was there and saw the body would know this. Now, what Dicus would say here is that, no, the only reason why she knows this is because the cops told her that. Because the cops corrupt and they fed her this information. There's no evidence to indicate that, but let's just say that maybe that is the case. These cops are corrupt and they told her that information. They fed that information to her. But there's more, and you're going to hear it in a minute.
Position of the body and the picture that was taken when her body was found. I saw that nowhere. And I frankly do not believe that any of the police officers in this case, although some of their police methods and investigative methods can certainly be called into question in terms of the reporting of information, the turning over of information, the thoroughness of the statements that were taken. While all of that is true, I don't believe that any of the police officers in this case were feeding information to Ms. Dicus, or that they would feed information to Ms. McNicholas in order.
Okay, so the judge is saying that he doesn't believe that the cops would just feed information, because the cops would know, right? Because they were there, any detectives, they were there, and the prosecution's trying to say, oh, the only reason why Catherine knows the position of the arms is because the cops fed her that information. But there's no evidence to support that, and there's no, like, if they were really corrupt, yeah, they may have done that, but there's no evidence of it. But we don't even if I just were to the judge is not doing this, but even if I were to suppose that were the case, there are some things that the cops didn't know that she did know. We'll get to that in a minute.
To permit her to set up to support a false story. The body position is something that no one could have known except someone who was there or someone who found the body. The location of where the body was, resting against a tree. Although one could go to the scene, no question about that. One could, and I frankly also do not believe that the detective that accompanied Ms. McNicholas to the scene directed her to the exact location. But even if you assume that to be the case.
So he's saying that, like, the prosecution was trying to say, oh, the detective guided Catherine to where the body was found instead of the other way around, which is what happened. Catherine knew the location of the body, and she directed the cops to where the body was. Again, so we have to, if we go by the defendant's tale of events, they're trying to say that the cops are incredibly corrupt, and they were feeding Catherine information and telling her, where the body was to make it look like she was a reliable witness.
No one could direct her to the specific location of where the body was. Now, it was resting against a particular tree, in a clump of trees. So I don't believe that Ms. McNicholas actually read through and attempted to create this theory. She testified to, and her statements show, that there were no shoes. How would she know that there were no shoes? She testified that there was some hot liquid, regurgitation from the stomach. That's corroborated by the testimony of the examiner, who said that is a common thing that occurs in a strangulation. And that also is some corroboration to the medical examiner's testimony or opinion, that although it's not based upon absolute forensic scientific evidence, but that corroborates their conclusion that this death was by strangulation.
Okay, so he's saying that Catherine knew that she wasn't wearing any shoes, and there was some fluid coming out of her mouth, which is consistent with strangulation. Which, yeah, that would be consistent with strangulation. I've seen that all the time.
Now, also, there were at the scene green fibers. Those green fibers can be found.
This is really important now. Okay, this is the green fibers thing. So I talked about this before. Now let's listen carefully.
On Exhibit 25A, they're seen in one of the tied-up nylons, and you can clearly see green, what appear to be lime green type fibers. Ms. McNicholas testified that green fibers that were intertwined, testified to that there was a green blanket. She felt that she remembered that the victim was wrapped up in. So what else is it about that? Although, having said all that, there's still a possibility that perhaps Ms. McNicholas, even assuming that she got this information, wanted to go beyond that, to look to see if there's other evidence that corroborates her version. On August the 5th, 1995, about a week or so after the disappearance, Ms. McNicholas was seen by Dr. Seiden. And of course, both sides present and have different versions of this, present this as some evidence to support their respective positions. It's clear in Exhibit M, Defendant M, that this was the phone contact. Apparently, the doctor was paged at 2 o'clock by the patient. She was extremely anxious and upset, crying, complaining of not knowing what to do because nobody believes me. Now, one could look at that in terms of showing, well, nobody believes you because you're a liar. Your husband says you're a liar. Your ex-husband says you're a liar. You're bipolar. It goes on to say that patient's boyfriend apparently recently involved in police matter, and so Mrs. McNicholas became involved as a witness. Now, I believe that 7 days after this incident, I believe that one who had been involved in, called early in the morning and who had been involved and knows, in fact, that they participated in the disposal of a body, one who in particular suffers from the kind of disorder that Miss McNicholas suffers from, I believe and accept that this is corroboration. It doesn't disprove her credibility. I believe that this corroborates that. And one would expect, just in common sense, one would expect if you became involved in that kind of an incident, one would expect, especially someone who suffers from this kind of mood disorder, to be extremely anxious and upset and crying. Now, is that anxiousness and upset and crying, is that necessarily because of fear? Because you know that you have some guilty involvement in this? Or regret? I don't know. But I do believe that this August the 5th note corroborates and doesn't disprove what Miss McNicholas's version B of the events that occurred on the early morning of July the 28th. Now, September the 9th, Miss McNicholas, and this is only a few days after the body was located. Miss McNicholas was with Rexford Raper, and she told him of the moving bundle. That also tends to corroborate. I believe Miss Raper was a credible witness. I think he was relaying accurately. But it's interesting, not only the fact that she said to Miss McNicholas told Mr. Raper some of the details of what occurred on July the 29th. But it's interesting that only a day or so after Miss Kiefer was located, that the defendant, who had just been told that his wife was now dead, is over at Mr. Raper's house, running around the house, knocking on doors, trying to get in. And she happens to be, according to the testimony of Mr. Raper, whom I believe, she was very careful. This was only 1 day, or 1 or 2 days after the body was located. She said, "Oh my God, he's going to kill her." I believe that corroborates the fear that Miss McNicholas perhaps testified to. That resulted in a 911 call. And while it is true that Miss McNicholas, even at that point in time, did not change her story with the police, and that tends to suggest, as defenses, I think, pointed out, does that raise some credibility issues? Of course it does. And that's something that I have to resolve. But in addition to the credibility issues, it also raises some serious questions about the credibility of the story of Mr. Dicus. If he is the distraught husband who's concerned, even one who simply wants to move on with his wife, why is he over at Mr. Raper's house engaging in the kind of stalking conduct that he engaged in? That is not consistent with a spouse, one who just lost their spouse, one who just learned 24 hours before that their spouse had been found deceased. In August of 96, Mr. Cherry was provided the complete details of what happened, as Miss McNicholas has discussed. And he corroborated Miss McNicholas's fears and even testified about how they moved to Florida because she was in fear, although they did return because of her illness. I also find Mr. Cherry to be a credible witness. I see that he has no reason or no motive to falsify or to not testify truthfully. I believe it was a medical record that September 23rd, 98 was referred to a murder in Glen Burnie that she had some knowledge of. Now, having said all of that, it is somewhat troubling to think, why then would Miss McNicholas have remained with? Because even shortly after September, after the Rexford Raper incident, Miss McNicholas moved in with Mr. Dicus. And of course that raises some serious questions about the credibility of Miss McNicholas' story. If you are so afraid of one, if you are so afraid that you would go into a shower stall, I guess, as Mr. Raper said, and cower in fear, then how could you possibly move in with that individual? How could you possibly then go to, in January of 96, go to a show, I think it was testified to. How could you possibly then accompany his family to Ocean City in the summer of 96? These are all serious questions that have to be answered, and they are difficult questions. The state's response to that is that this is a typical of abusive relationships. And I think that is correct. It is typical of abusive relationships.
Maybe. I'm more inclined to think that this was all, like her idea. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if he was in some ways abusive, maybe threatened her, because if David Dicus was ever worried that she would go to the cops or something like that, he probably would threaten her life. And that's probably why he felt confident enough to get her involved. Well, I mean, it was her idea, but because he probably thought that he could use this as leverage. You're involved, you're going to go to prison too if you rat me out. And also, maybe he did threaten her. I don't know. But I still believe that Catherine was the mastermind of this whole caper in the first place.
Now, what I have attempted to do is to try to answer these questions is to look at the remaining evidence. And if that is all I had, it may very well be a very difficult case. There are a number of writings in this case, letters, if you will, that are clearly in the hands of Mr. Dicus. Specifically exhibits 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And I'm not going to read all of these letters, but I think that some of these letters are worthy of comment and review to show what these letters indicate. What do these letters show, not only about Mr. Dicus's feelings about Miss McNicholas, but how long those feelings have existed, and do any of these bear upon what happened in the past. Exhibit 4. Do you have real understanding of how much I love you? How in love I am? How devoted I am to you? I have given up, forsaken, and this is what I find to be most important, otherwise done away with job, residence, family, friends. None of these things bear much, if any, importance in relation to you and our life together. Only you, me, and our children matter. Exhibit 5. If I had good reason, I could do just about anything. Exhibit 6. I know there are other people in our lives, people who need us, depend on us, other commitments, but I'm trimming the fat. More and more, I have looked, he has been and continues to be my future, my sanity. Exhibit 7 refers to why he's watching, and Mr. Dicus said, is watching the X-Files. And there's a reference to Mulden dying of asphyxiation. Really not much context as to why that would be pointed out. Most interesting to the court is Plaintiff's Exhibit 8. Planning revenge on Fender. Now, I must say that when I first read that letter, at least before the closing argument, I didn't have a clue as far as what Fender meant. I had no clue. But just as I think that these letters contain not only specific references and discussions, I think that hidden within these letters are messages. Obviously, there's no question about it. Fender is Greg Neff, spelled backwards. Now, there are other letters that refer to Miss Nicholas that suggest that you have seen me at my worst. You know what I am capable of. But why would the defendant, and I might point out that this is not the only reference. There are two references to revenge on Mr. Neff. And that makes one wonder, why would there be any need to take revenge upon Mr. Neff? Mr. Neff was a neighbor. Mr. Neff was not, from the evidence, not someone that he saw frequently. They knew each other, saw each other from time to time. So why would one need to take revenge upon Greg Neff? Well, I think the answer is in the discussion that Mr. Neff had with Mr. Dicus after the disappearance of his wife. Mr. Neff is the individual, I believe, whose father was a police officer, a police detective, and I suppose Mr. Neff kind of envisions himself as some amateur detective. But Mr. Neff apparently also was an observant neighbor. Mr. Neff is, I believe, one who saw, one Saturday, who saw the victim's car up on 97. Mr. Neff then and his wife, when they came home, as two neighbors would do, said to Mr. Dicus that that's your wife's car on 97.
Okay, so this is important. So he's talking about a witness, Mr. Neff or something like that. I don't know. I can't really hear. So this is a neighbor, and he saw the station wagon abandoned on Route 97 North, which we talked about before, obviously. And so he's the one who saw it, and he's the one who told David Dicus that, look, your wife's car is on the side of this highway. So let's listen on.
And there was some discussion about that. And Mr. Neff then observed, I think he also testified that they observed Mr. Dicus coming home that Saturday with Miss McNicholas and with Lou. But he also observed Mr. Dicus cleaning, or as he called it, detailing the car. Something that he and another neighbor said the same thing, but he described it as not just cleaning, but detailing with all the tools, the water, the bucket. He was seen actually inside the car, taking up the carpet and detailing the car.
Okay, so this is really important. This neighbor, who, like I said, was the one who actually spotted the abandoned station wagon on the side of Route 97 and told David Dicus about it, he later saw David Dicus and Catherine deep cleaning the inside of that car. What the fuck? What? Your wife goes missing, and then your first instinct when you get the vehicle home is to deep clean the inside of that vehicle? Are you out of your friggin' mind? Are you kidding me? No, 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 no. That is the most incriminating thing you could ever do. Him and Catherine David Dicus and Catherine were deep cleaning the inside of the station wagon, specifically the part where the body would have been. That's what the judge is talking about here. Let me rewind it a little bit.
Actually inside the car. He and another neighbor said the same thing, that he described it as not just cleaning. That they observed Mr. Dicus coming home that Saturday with Miss McNicholas and with Lou. But he also observed Mr. Dicus cleaning, or as he called it, detailing the car. Something that he and another neighbor said the same thing, that he described it as not just cleaning, but detailing with all the tools, the water, the bucket. And he was seen actually inside the car, taking up the carpet and detailing the car. And he thought that to be unusual. And I believe it was also Mr. Knapp who testified that he then read in the newspaper, and in the newspaper it said that Miss Keefer was missing. So he said to his wife, we now know why he was cleaning his car. Obviously, Mr. Knapp shared the suspicions that apparently became the suspicions that the defense contends led to DDI. But there was a subsequent conversation that Mr. Knapp had with Mr. Dicus on August the 2nd. And that conversation was very interesting. In that conversation, Mr. Knapp made some comment to the defendant about, have you heard from your wife? And the comment response was, well, I think she's probably out on a binge. Well, what kind of binge? She's talking about an alcohol binge and gambling. What kind of a binge? And there was some response to that. And then Mr. Dicus commented that he was upset with the police. Upset because the police were questioning him for detail. And he felt like, and Mr. Brad Jones pointed this out, although I think he missed one thing. He felt like that the police were questioning him. He didn't even have enough time to mourn his wife. They ought to be out there looking for the real killer. Now, he said this on August the 2nd. The evidence is pretty obvious that on August the 2nd, the speaker was a missing person and not deceased. However, only the killer would know whether or not would know that.
So basically the judge is saying here that David Dicus was complaining that the cops were asking him too many questions and that they should be out there looking for the real killers or whatever. But at that time, the body had not been found. So his wife was still just a missing person, not declared deceased. So only the real killer would know this.
So on August the 2nd, Mr. Dicus is complaining about not being able to mourn. He would have had no reason to mourn at that point in time. He should have been concerned about where his wife was, why she didn't come home.
Yeah, so he's saying, like, David Dicus is complaining he's not even given enough time to mourn. Well, this dude has not been mourning at all. He's been deep cleaning the inside of his station wagon, where, because he hauled the body in it. But like I said, at the time, it was not known that his wife was dead. She was still a missing person. So now he's talking about mourning when there was no reason for him to mourn. There was reason for him to be as cooperative as possible to help the police in investigating and finding his wife.
On a binge, what hospital was she in? That wasn't his concern, and I frankly believe that Mr. Neff was credible witness. Now, of course, this all raises many other questions. There were different versions given by Mr. Dicus when he did report. And I didn't go into much detail except to say that there are questions relating to what happened that early morning when Miss Keefer woke up, or what happened that night. Did they have great sex? Or was it a situation where they thought because he wanted sex and she didn't? They're conflicting stories. Pretty different stories. The Does a loving and caring husband permit a wife to leave in the early morning hours, saying she's going to go to work? A woman like Miss Keeper, who was one who was concerned about her appearance, one who wouldn't go to work wearing a white shirt with no bra, with no socks, with blue shorts. That's not the woman that Miss Smith testified. She was very particular about her clothing, her shorts, very particular. Questions also raised about why would Mr. Dicus, who was told by two people that Saturday that her wife's car might be up on 97, only a mile and a half or 1.7 miles away. Would someone who is sincerely concerned about the safety of his wife, or perhaps thinks she's on a binge, would he not go right up to check that out? Or would he simply say to his son, okay, fine, I'll do what you want. We'll go to a movie and see a movie with my girlfriend. That's incredible. It does not show an individual who is concerned about a spouse who had just left because of an argument. He didn't tell his mother. He says that it's because he didn't want to. He didn't want it to be private. Yet, as soon as he got the phone call from his mother, he then went out and got the car. Let's talk about the car for a second. He went up and got the car, recognized that it was his wife's car, knowing that she was missing for a day and a half. Common sense will tell you that if you suspect that there's something that might have gone wrong, she's not there, maybe the police ought to look at this. That's not what happened. Mr. Dicus changed the flat tire that the evidence shows clearly was flat because of a puncture, an intentional flat, not something that occurred because of a blowout. And giving the benefit of the doubt, assume that one is distraught and upset, and perhaps at that point may not know what's going on. You may change the tire and take it home. Are you going to change the tire and immediately go and get the tire fixed? That makes absolutely no sense. That is not consistent with innocence.
So he's saying that when you arrive at this abandoned vehicle that belongs to your wife, you're not going to change the tire and then drive it back home. You're going to contact the police. Okay, this was before the age of cell phones, but you would go to the nearest payphone and you would call the cops and have them investigate this immediately. That's not what David Dicus did. He changed the flat tire and drove it home and then apparently deep cleaned the inside of it. Unbelievable.
When you combine that with...
Okay, so that's the end of part 1. I'm going to bring up part 2. Part 2 is going to be, I think, like 20 minutes or so. Let's see.
That is not consistent with innocence. And when you combine that with detailing the car, it makes things just that much more apparent. There was nothing mechanically wrong with that car, and that just raises some serious questions. There was this consent search that revealed a brochure that he's dealing with children and death. Why would that be needed? Why would the defendant call, as I think he did, I know he did, call Miss Smith, Mary Smith, a woman that he perhaps knew of, but didn't know very well, and ask her to call the police to say he's an okay guy. To say everything was okay. Well, he had to know that everything wasn't okay. Miss Smith knew there was something, knew that the secret suspected a relationship, and it is undeniable and clear that Mr. Dicus had a relationship with Miss McNicholas. And he, so that's the defendant's own sister questioned him and had some reservations about his version, and he failed to deny his guilt when asked by his own sister. And also, I think striking is that his attempt to involve his son in the letter that he wrote where he referred to the animal and referred or stated it's something which might be helpful. He's a real nutcase, suggesting that there be a phone call that she may vote. This clearly shows a consciousness of guilt.
Okay, so here he's talking about how apparently David Dicus was trying to get his son to intimidate the witness, which was Catherine. So yeah, uh, an innocent person, supposedly innocent person's trying to get his own son to intimidate the witness, Catherine.
Even though there was a subsequent letter that perhaps was found that suggests that, don't do that, that doesn't detract at all from the fact of the first letter.
Yeah, so apparently there was a second letter saying, "Oh, you know what? Don't do that after all." Especially after the first letter, which was trying to tell you to intimidate a witness, got intercepted, and that's actually what happened. The first letter got intercepted by, um, family member on the mother's side, and was brought to the attention of the authorities. So yeah, he only wrote that second letter after the first letter was intercepted, and trying to cover his ass.
There were statements regarding, and there's been reference to by the defendant in statements of Miss McNicholas as a lesbian. She was referred to as a lesbian friend. One who reads his letters, that is the defendant's letters, that have been characterized as love letters, and they clearly are love letters. They might be characterized as much more than that. It is clear to the court that, and it's not for me, and I don't judge one way or the other one's sexual preference, but the person that Mr. Dicus was writing to, the person that Mr. Dicus in his letter was obsessed with, the person that Mr. Dicus had this graphically sexual relationship as described in these letters, could not have been a lesbian. Now, that raises a question. The question being, that's a lie. Why would Mr. Dicus say that? Well, Miss McNicholas lied about that. Miss McNicholas admitted to two of Mr. Dicus' sisters that she intentionally told the police and lied about her sexuality. The fact of the sexuality of one way or the other is irrelevant, not important. What is important to the court is that shows a clear concert of action between Miss McNicholas and Mr. Dicus. And that is something that is inconsistent with Mr. Dicus' intentions that he is an innocent victim of police of DVI. He appeared to be indifferent to the news of the car being broken down the first time. He appeared to be indifferent to her leaving the night that she left. And there was one other statement that Mr. Nicholas made that I think is important and bears upon the defendant told Kathy apparently she was feeling somewhat difficult, and I think Mrs. Nicholas probably went through a long period of time. She did deny her involvement 9 different times. There's no question about that. She claimed that she told that the defendant told her not to feel guilty, that he killed his wife because it would have happened anyway. I don't think there's any issue in terms of premeditation, as the description that Miss McNicholas gave as to how the defendant said he killed his wife, choking her for a period of 15 minutes, and the totality of the facts would clearly show premeditation. Now, having said all this and drawn all these inferences from these facts, There's still the troubling third theme of the defense, and that is the lead. That is those people who potentially saw Miss Keeper after she was supposedly missing. And I don't criticize any of the witnesses who came in here and testified. There are a number of witnesses who came in, some of whom showed up fairly late in the case, even a day or so before the trial. People should be encouraged to get involved and report that which they say they see. And I previously in this courtroom commented about what I think was a problem with the police department's revealing these leads. From my standpoint, this case at this point in time is not a matter of, we're not trying the police department's police practice. That's another issue, although it has some bearing upon this, but that's another issue. And as I often tell juries, it's not a question of numbers of witnesses, it's not a question of numbers of leads either, or numbers, it's a question of examining each lead in order to determine whether or not that lead bears upon, is relevant to, and provides the court with some credible evidence that would support the citing of this keeper subsequent to events of July 28th. The defense's key witness in that regard is Greg Thomas. Mr. Thomas is a convincing person. He said that 4 years later, he said that he saw his neighbor, Terry Keeper, on the side of I-97 at about 10:30 in the morning on July 29th. And I believe that Mr. Thomas today thinks that's what he actually witnessed. However, we know that he only met her once before at a busy party. He only observed her from a distance a few times. He didn't remember conversations.
Not sure what the deal is with this noise. Let's see. Let me see if I can skip ahead.
A few times. He didn't remember conversations that he had with the victim's father in August of '95 when he told Mr. Keeper that he was traveling too fast to identify who it was. He could only tell that he'd seen a woman on the side of the road across 2 lanes of traffic. Mr. Thomas said he couldn't remember the color of her car. Could have been blue, could have been brown. He said she was broken down, but he saw this woman's car broken down in a different location than Terry Keeper's car was broken down, near the Dicus exit, not Porterfield Road. He also spoke to Terry Keeper's brother on approximately August the 9th, 1995. He told Mr. Keeper when he came into the gas station with missing person posters that he'd seen a woman with shoulder-length, blonde, curly hair standing by the side of the road next to the car on 97. That's not a description of Miss Keeper. The question is raised by one of the officers whether that's a description of Miss McNicholas. Terry Keeper's hair was brown and cut just above her ears. Mr. Keeper claims that on the evening he spoke with Mr. Thomas indicated that he thought but wasn't sure that he had seen Terry Keeper on the side of the road. Mr. Thomas also spoke with Detective Crayley on August the 14th, 95, and again described the woman that he had seen as having blonde, curly hair. Tommy Mulder, an employee at the Adequate station near the Dicus residence on Todd Court, says that he saw a woman outside the station at a payphone. He didn't know the date, knew it was a Friday, and there's other testimony that corroborates that this was Friday, July the 28th, early July 29th. He saw this woman, he says, about 11:30, 12 a.m. Described her as having shoulder-length hair. Terry Keeper's hair was cut above her ears. Described her vehicle as a light gray Buick Regal in Monte Carlo. Terry Keeper drove a light blue Toyota. It's inconsistent with the description of the victim. It's also inconsistent with the defendant's own statement. So even if that is a true and accurate statement, then the defendant has lied in his statements about what happened at 11:30. She was supposedly home at that time. Other witnesses who testified, Phyllis Crenshaw, Raymond and Sharon Stockman. I've reviewed each and every, Deanna Barnes and Arnold, I have reviewed each and every one of the lead testified to in the lead sheets. And as I said before, this is not a question of simply the totality of the number of leads and possibilities. I don't find that any of these leads credibly fit into and reflect a sighting of Miss Kiefer after the time she disappeared.
Okay, so it looks like maybe there were some witnesses that maybe testified, but they were inconsistent, contradicted the facts. Um, for whatever reason, maybe they mistook, I guess, Catherine for Terry Kiefer. Maybe they just saw someone, and they didn't. Maybe they didn't know what she even looked like, and they just thought that they saw her. Don't know. But like the decomposition of the body, it gives you a time frame. Like you can estimate how long the body has been dead for.
There is one of the leads, though, that is somewhat interesting. And that's the one for Mr. Ayed, I believe his name. I'm probably mispronouncing his name. He said he thought he saw a woman at the Amico station on the evening of July 28, 95. Said that the woman stated she had just returned from jail. The woman had on a shirt with a flat collar which was unbuttoned to reveal the woman's bra. Of course, we know that Terry Kiefer was found with no bra, light collar t-shirt with no buttons. Additionally, the woman shouted that her husband was with another woman, that her husband locked her out of the house. So there could possibly be some correlation. And I think he also mentioned that it was a blue station wagon. So of all the sightings, this to the court appears to be one that perhaps comes the closest to identifying Miss Kiefer. However, even if this is true, and there are inconsistencies, it wasn't a flat collar, she wasn't wearing a bra. Although that assumes that at the time that Miss Kiefer was killed, she was wearing the same clothes that she was when she was dumped, and that may not be a fair assumption. But if this is accurate, then what that means is that Mr. Dicus' story is not correct. He was attempting to get back into the house. So I don't find that this sighting, even if accurate, is inconsistent, would establish a sighting of Miss Kiefer subsequent to the time that she was supposedly missing. Miss McNicholas, we get back to the credibility of the mountain evidence versus the missing pieces and incomplete pieces of the puzzle. And getting back to the testimony of Kathy McNicholas. Credibility is something that we tell juries that you can believe all, you can believe none, you can believe part of what you heard. And one of the officers in this case was even asked, I agree with Officer Luther Johnson of Howard County, who said, when asked if he believed Ms. McNicholas, and he said that there were aspects of what she said that he didn't believe, which means that there are aspects of what he says that he did believe. And this is consistent with my view of Ms. McNicholas. She is a woman that has many problems. She has many medical problems, bipolar 1, bipolar 2. She is a woman who, if her story is correct, knew full well that she had just participated as an accessory to a murder. She is a woman that had a sexual relationship with Mr. Dicus, having known each other from the time they were 12 years old, a relationship that was resumed some 6 months or so prior to the time that Ms. Kiefer disappeared. She is a woman who, with all of her problems, is one that Mr. Dicus became obsessed with. His letters show that. I needed to do nothing more than look at his letters. His letters convinced me that he was so obsessed with her that he would have done anything to anyone except his son Lou and except her children in order to accomplish the goal that he had. And that goal was for him to spend, as he has described it in his letters, graphically, I might add, a life with Miss McNicholas.
So there you go. That's the motive. He was willing to sacrifice anyone and anything except his son to be with Catherine. this childhood sweetheart of his. He was obsessed with her, and he was willing to kill his wife in order to be with her. And yeah, I believe Catherine put him up to it. They're both murdering scumbags.
This McNicholas story is consistent with, so to get back to credibility, if this were simply a matter of is Miss McNicholas credible, I may have some serious reservations. But it is not. And frankly, it is not even close. The totality of the evidence in this case corroborates that which I believe, and that is that it was Mr. Dicus who killed Miss Kiefer in the early morning of, or late evening of July the 28th, or early morning of July the 29th. I do believe that these letters show much more than just a caring person. I believe that hidden within these letters, just as there is hidden a message to Mr. Fenger to revenge on Fenger, I think there is a message was a message in these letters to Miss McNicholas. And that message is that I will have you and I will take no for an answer, and you know what I'm capable of. That convinces me and explains the conduct of Miss McNicholas and her hesitancy to come forward and her fear. She is fearful of the same thing happening to her, although fortunately she made the decision at some point in time to terminate that relationship. It's true that the pieces of the puzzle, a few are missing, a few may be cloudy. It's true that some of the pieces might be somewhat, the images might be somewhat unclear. But when you put all the pieces that exist together, when you take from that mountain of evidence that Mr. Raggioni referred to, the image to this court is clear beyond a reasonable doubt and to moral certainty that the defendant, David Allen Dicus, is guilty of the first-degree murder of his wife, Terry Lynn Kiefer, and I so find. Verdict guilty in count one. I'll order a full pre-sentence report, background check, report, recommendation, including the guidelines work to take place.
Easy for your son. That's your son. I don't know. I'm not going to look around. Yeah, we'll keep trying, man. Understand that?
February 16th of 1:30.
Judge, I'm going to be in a trial, extended trial in Baltimore County, a death trial in that day. Can I go, if I can be so presumptuous, to February 25th? I have a murder trial on that particular date. When? February 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. I'm going to be on, I hate to say this, on vacation. Can we go to the 25th of February? Okay. Can you give me some more, can you go to February 10th or 11th?
Okay, so most of the facts of the case have been established here. I could play it a little bit more, but there's like 3 more minutes left, but I don't think there's anything terribly important there. You can hear Lucas Dicus crying at the end, though. This is where Terry Kiefer was buried. I have to say, I'm really disappointed in David Dicus's son, Lucas Dicus. I never met Terry Kiefer, but I feel like I'm a better son to her than Lucas Dicus ever was. Because Lucas Dicus has been gaslighting, lying for his father this entire time. And in fact, he made in what I believe to be a really repulsive statement, um, which is a complete disservice to his mother's memory right here. Lucas says, "I fully believe in my dad's innocence." Lucas said after sentencing, "I also somehow believe that if he had done something, he would have had a good reason and I would forgive him." No, Lucas. Your father, David Dicus, did not have a good reason for murdering your mother. He murdered your mother for his own selfish reasons. How many lives did he ruin because of his own selfishness? He ruined your life. He ruined the lives of so many people on your mother's side. He ruined his own life, but that's fine with me. And if that were the only life he ruined, then that would be justice. But no, he ruined so many other people's lives. And if I were you, I would hate my father. But no, Lucas loves his father to death because he's a buffoon. Even though I believe that Lucas, on some level, actually does believe that his father's a murderer. It might even be worse than that, but I'll set that aside for now. Your mother deserved a lot better than what happened to her. And I believe that her memory deserves better than these lies. These lies that are being said about her, even after her own death. If she could speak now, I'm sure she would want people to know the truth about how she really died. And how she really died was that her husband, David Dicus, murdered her. And Catherine aided and abetted it. That justice was robbed. But David Dicus is exactly in where he deserves to be, which is in prison. Maryland Correctional Training Center, to be specific. And that's all I gotta say. See ya.